Youngblood is a co-op shooter that plays more like The Division than what it should. It's completely weird, open levels, non-linear progression, super bullet spongy enemies, and brain-dead AI for both the enemies and your teammates. Most of you know I love a good first-person shooter. Tons of people do. This channel is predicated on first-person shooters, but if you've played as many FPS games as I have over the years, you also know there are a ton of bad ones out there, and today, well, I'm going to call them out. The absolute worst, the most insulting first-person shooters to ever come out. And if you ask me, the gaming industry would have been better if they were never released. What is up, everybody? Chaos here. Welcome to the channel. Do me a favor. Take 2 seconds, drop a like, make sure you have those notifications fully turned on so you're part of the Team Chaos notification squad, and let's go. You tell me if I missed any of your least favorite FPS as we go through this, and alright. Kicking things off today is Battlefield, hold on, Play for Free. Does anybody remember this disaster? Play for Free was a free-to-play spin-off of the Battlefield series developed by DICE and released on PC in April of 2011. Now, during the early days, it was actually pretty good, and it had a big following as it was kind of the greatest hits Battlefield game that anybody could download and go play. But after a few months, EA decided to be EA again and completely changed the business model. They filled the game with egregious microtransactions, and then there was a scandal where players who bought content before the model change had to rebuy the stuff they had already spent money on. And like many greedy free-to-play games, the balancing was terrible. There was obviously overpowered weapons that you had to rent with real money, that's pretty bad. Now, Play for Free had such great potential, but EA's greed completely ruined it, and in July of 2015, just 4 years after it launched, the servers were shut down. And all that money that you put into it, well, it just went poof, up in smoke, into nothingness. Of all the EA blunders, and there's a lot throughout the last couple decades, I'm surprised more people don't talk about this one more. At number 9, Wolfenstein Youngblood. The game is terrible. Now, the rebooted Wolfenstein series from Machine Games has been largely a success. The first game, The New Order, was good. The sequel, The New Colossus, was a bit of a step backwards, but it was still solid. But this spin-off threw that into the trash and completely walked away from everything that everybody loved about the series. Released in July of 2019, not very long ago. Youngblood is a co-op shooter that plays more like The Division than what it should. It's completely weird, open levels, non-linear progression, super bullet spongy enemies, and brain-dead AI for both the enemies and your teammates. Now, the game got mixed reviews from critics and horrible reviews from gamers, and I bet plenty of you actually forgot that it came out less than a year ago. So hopefully, the series gets back on its feet when the next when Part 3 comes out, assuming Bethesda didn't cancel that after the fiasco of Youngblood. Do you guys remember that weird time in the late 2000s when seemingly everybody was trying to get in on military shooters? One of those companies was the History Channel. That's right, the History Channel, who put together a World War II shooter that was so obviously rushed and unpolished that it's actually one of the worst rated FPS games ever on Metacritic. I'm talking about the History Channel Battle for the Pacific. Now, it was released in November of 2007, just a couple weeks after COD 4 and Halo 3, which is horrible timing. And it had you going through some of the most famous battles during the Pacific Theater, and it originally seemed like it was going to try and be a really authentic portrayal of those events. Once you started the game up, it became clear it was a desperate attempt to grab some cash from Call of Duty and Medal of Honor fans. The graphics, they were trash. The music, it was repetitive and uninspired. The level design was super basic and uninteresting, and the gameplay, it felt super dated, even by 2007 standards, and there wasn't even a sprint button in this game. The PS3 version is sitting with a 36 critic score and a 1.8 user score on Metacritic, making it one of the worst rated FPS games on the site. And I'm glad the cash grab brand tie-ins aren't as common as they used to be. At number 7, Hour of Victory. Speaking of terrible World War II games, Hour of Victory is another standout turd from that era, the same year, 2007, developed by Infusion Interactive and published by Midway. Yeah, Midway for Xbox 360. Now, it was another desperate attempt to milk the World War II genre after the success of games like COD 2 and Medal of Honor. And once again, it completely failed to capture the things that made those games good. The campaign took you through all these various arenas from the Second World War, and the multiplayer supported up to 12 players and a handful of modes throughout Xbox Live. But this didn't change the fact that the game was super shallow. It was ugly, super buggy, borderline unplayable in certain parts, which made it one of the worst reviewed games of that year. GameSpot tore this game apart in the review, and at one point they even stated, no one, under any circumstances, should play this game. Woo. Next up is New World Order. Released in late 2002 in Europe, in early 2003 in North America, New World Order is one of the worst reviewed games of its time, and it's not hard to see why. It's actually hard to find footage of this game, because it was so efficiently thrown out of people's memory. Developed by Termite Games, the campaign had you going through a future world of really pretentious conspiracy theories and tinfoil hat storylines that took themselves so seriously that you couldn't even get ironic enjoyment out of it. Then, just add insult to injury. The gameplay and the graphics were bad. It seemed like the developers really thought they were doing something a lot cooler than what they were doing. Now, it's one thing to have a bad game, but it's another to have a game that's awful in almost every way, but you could tell the developers thought it was awesome, which kind of makes the whole ordeal sad. New World Order is sitting with a 32 critic score and a 3.0 user score on Metacritic, and has been almost completely forgotten by the internet until we made this video. At number 5. Overkill's The Walking Dead. Do you remember this game? I don't want to. I'm upset because they hooked me in with the trailers. Developed by Overkill, the makers of the excellent Payday series, The Walking Dead was supposed to be this awesome new Walking Dead co-op FPS that was based on the comics rather than the show. You would put together your band of survivors, you would venture through various areas of the zombie apocalypse, and kind of this blend of Left 4 Dead, Destiny, and Payday hybrid, or at least that's what we thought we were getting. Overkill's Walking Dead, it was troubled. The development cycle was bad, with work reportedly being halted and restarted multiple times. And the final product, well, it was only released because deadlines simply could not be pushed back any further, and it showed. The Walking Dead was riddled with bugs. The level and the gameplay design was super shallow and unimpressive. The AI, it was non-functional, and the core gameplay loop was way different than what was promised. It was more just about killing humans rather than zombies. Who would have thought? Overkill's The Walking Dead was a flop, despite the huge marketing budget behind it. In a few months after the PC release, guess what? It was completely pulled from Steam, the internet, and everywhere. And the console ports, well, they were canceled. At number 4, it's been a while since we've mentioned this one. Aliens Colonial Marines, one of the most notorious first-person shooters of all time, but I'm not putting it on this list because of its badness. After all, I've said before, I don't think it's as bad as people like to say. Don't get me wrong, it's bad. But I don't think it's one of the worst thing ever. But I'm going to put it on the list because of the shady business deals that went down behind the scenes, as well as the fact that it dumped all over the concept that could have been cool. The game was developed by Gearbox, but as everyone is probably aware, the game showed off at the E3 demo was not the game that we got on the final day. Gearbox CEO Randy Pitchford refuses to give an explanation as to why this happened. Now, there are tons of reports of money laundering going on behind the scenes with the game's budget, much of the work being secretly outsourced to a third-party developer so Gearbox could work on Borderlands 2. Now, I won't get into that because it's way too much for me to explain in a video, but like this. Alien Colonial Marines deserves to be on this list because of all the shadiness that went on, and I'll let you look into the exact details for yourself because a lot of them are weird. Now, today, Colonial Marines stands as a testament as to just how shady game development can be at the top level and pretty much destroyed the chances of us ever getting a full action horror FPS in the Alien universe, which it would have been awesome. At number 3, Day 1 Garry's Incident. If you were around the YouTube gaming world in the early 2010s, you probably recognize this game because there was a ton of drama regarding it and the late Total Biscuit. Day 1 Garry's Incident was a weird first-person survival game with shooter and horror elements thrown in, and you played as a dude trying to survive in the Amazon rainforest after the eruption of the Yellowstone supervolcano. The game was buggy, it was ugly, even by indie game standards, and it wasn't very well designed. And following the release in September of 2013, Total Biscuit did a review where he tore it apart. And this ended up getting the attention of the developers who filed a DMCA takedown on the review claiming Total Biscuit violated copyright law by reviewing it, which obviously that's an abuse of the system. The devs got into hot water when it was revealed that the game had a ton of good user reviews on Metacritic from accounts that only reviewed that one game, which is suspicious, right? Eventually, the developers retracted the DMCA and apologized, but the damage was done and the studio became a laughingstock. At number 2, Duke Nukem Forever. I'm sure you expected it to be here, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about the exact things wrong with Duke Nukem Forever, but I will say this. I'm putting it so high on the list because of the impact it had on the series and the gaming industry as a whole. It was one of the icons of action games in the late 90s and early 2000s, and he was one of the most recognizable characters in gaming. Most people will still agree. Duke Nukem 3D is one of the best first-person shooters ever, and Duke was no stranger to bad games. If you go through Duke's entire catalog of games, there was a lot of bad ones. But Duke Nukem Forever, well, it came out and it destroyed everything. The franchise's reputation was ruined, and all the good, all the good that Duke did, it was erased. If Duke Nukem Forever had been decent, even if it had just been canceled outright and the developers did something different with the license, Duke may still be a gaming icon to this day. And at number 1 today, the Slaughtering Grounds. Now, you would think indie developers would have paid attention to the day 1 Garry's incident, but apparently not. The Slaughtering Grounds was a horror-themed FPS released on Steam in Halloween of 2014, and it was awful. It was cheap, store-bought assets, bad gameplay, stolen artwork, terrible visuals. I could go on and on and on. So a popular YouTube critic ripped it apart. Jim also pointed out the devs have been monitoring the Steam forums and deleting negative reviews to help boost the approval rating in response to this. The developers issued a DMCA takedown on Jim's video and sued him for a whopping $10 million, charged him for assault, libel, and slander. I mean, they weren't done though. A few months later, the devs contacted Valve requesting the personal information of 100 Steam users so they could file suit against them as well for an additional $18 million, citing personal injury. Valve quickly put their foot down, denying their request for user information and pulling all their games from Steam, and a few months later, the lawsuit against Jim Sterling was dropped. Jim later made a full video recapping the whole situation. You can still find it on his channel, so I recommend checking it out. Gaming is a relatively young field, and there's still a lot of industry rules that haven't been written, so it's important that we remember incidents like this for the future. And there you have it. Those are some of the worst FPS games ever. They are FPS games that should be banned. They should be gone, deleted from the internet. I'll see you guys soon.